If your company lost all its revenue in just 14 days, would your leadership hold? In this episode, Julia Hartz, co-founder and former CEO of Eventbrite, shares what it really takes to lead when everything breaks, from negative revenue days to rebuilding an entire company in real time. Julia faced leadership under pressure, where culture, trust, and decision-making determine survival. ILI's leadership development work equips leaders to make high-stakes decisions, sustain trust, and execute through disruption, the exact capabilities that determined Eventbrite's survival. When you're leading in uncertainty, we help you build the capacity to not just navigate disruption, but lead through it. Learn more at innovativeleadership.com. But now, listen to Julia's story and learn what it takes when leadership is the only thing left standing.
Welcome to Innovating Leadership, Co-Creating Our Future, where we explore the practices, mindsets, and systems that help leaders navigate complexity and create sustainable impact. I'm Maureen Metcalf, CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute. I work with senior leaders and organizations to strengthen strategy to execution, develop leadership capabilities, and build continuity so results endure through disruption. Today's guest is Julia Hartz. Julia is known for helping build Eventbrite across its multi-phase growth journey. Are you ready to jump in, Julia?
I'm so ready. Thank you for having me.
Looking back at Eventbrite's 20-year journey, what leadership systems or decision discipline proved most critical as the company scaled through multiple phases of growth?
Well, over 2 decades, Eventbrite has seen the advent of social media. When we began, we really were focusing mostly on Google search as our vector of finding new customers and growth. And within 2.5 to 3 years, our main mode of distribution was social media through Facebook. So that was one big wave of a technological shift. The second was mobile. When we started Eventbrite, people were using their phones for mostly communicating with each other. And in the span of the last 2 decades, we have seen Eventbrite be rebuilt for mobile and have a really far extensive system and not only distribution network, but functionality through mobile devices. The third was big data. When we began, data was kept locked away in a database, and today it informs most of all of our decision-making and how we get closest to our customers. And of course, the big wave of AI now helping us build faster, more efficiently, and more personalized for our customers. In the middle, we had a big growth era that was marked by 6 acquisitions of companies. We had, of course, our IPO and taking on many new shareholders and capital. We had international expansion, and then a global pandemic that rendered the basis of our business null and void for a period of time and essentially gave us this huge opportunity to reset 14 years in and rebuild the company. The 2 systems that allowed us to persevere through that time, that I think, whether it was weathering pandemics and recessions or this constant technological change, was really A, capital efficiency, and B, treating our customers as our greatest advocates and scouts. And I think underpinning all of it, of course, was resilience and belief in the core mission that bringing people together through live experiences is something that all humans need.
Can you overlay now your career trajectory? Because I think it's easy to, as we're navigating AI, even the pandemic for many of us seems like it was a while ago now. Yet you're talking 20 plus years. Level set us on your career journey as technology changed over that arc of time.
Well, I came into starting Eventbrite not being the obvious entrepreneur. I met my then fiance, now and still husband, Kevin Hartz, when I was working in television, and I was on the development team at MTV. and then at FX Networks. And so I was really focused on story arc and evoking emotions from audiences through great stories. And I was able to work with some of the best storytellers in the world. And when I saw through Kevin, we had this meet cute at a wedding. And what I learned from him for the next 2 years when we were in our sort of dating era was how quickly things were changing in Silicon Valley. He's a multiple time entrepreneur and investor. And I was intrigued by the idea of being more on the disruptor side than the disrupted side, and just the velocity of how quickly things were moving in his world versus my world. When we made the decision to start a company together, I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. I wasn't the kid with the lemonade stand growing up. I was a ballerina. I was really focused. I'm very good at taking direction and adjusting, and I have a lot of discipline. But I did realize almost on day one that I finally solved the mystery of why I didn't love school. And it was because I didn't love to be just talked at. I love to learn by doing. I love to get my hands dirty. And so starting a company is exactly that. And I'll never forget the day that we set up our little office in a windowless phone closet in a warehouse in Potrero Hill with sawhorses and plywood as desks. And I remember opening my computer and typing, how do I create my first search engine marketing campaign into Google? I thought that was kind of meta. And I got this jolt, this almost like lightning strike of energy. And so what I love about being an entrepreneur, even though I wasn't born one, but I learned how to be a great one through Kevin's mentorship, is that I'm an excellent problem solver. And I really leaned into building a great culture in the company that now 20 years later, I can say is one of our great legacies. I also decided about halfway through the journey that I needed to not be concerned about the fact that I felt like I was being an imposter as an entrepreneur, but actually embrace the fact that I'm a great operator, and that was the yin to Kevin's yang. And, with our third co-founder, Renaud Visage, who built Eventbrite, we made an awesome founding team. So that taught me a lot about sticking with your core competencies and leaning in. And then not everyone has to be the perennial entrepreneur.
It wasn't just a combination of systems. It was your heart showing up every day.
It really was. And I think that the culture part, I can't sort of underestimate how important that is. And I have this benefit now of being on the other side of 20 years and of building Eventbrite. And I can say without a doubt, that was the best investment that we made. But in that, there were systems. So I remember when we had raised our first round of outside capital from Sequoia Capital and Rulaf Botha, and that was about almost 3 years into our journey. So we'd been bootstrapping and been supported by family and friends and early investors that were, and angels until then. But this was our first big slug of capital. And we were going to grow from 30 people to 100 people in less than a year. And instinctively, I understood that we were going to be growing from a team to a company. And all around us, the 2006 vintage companies were going through, the ones that had made it through, from product market fit to traction and had been funded, were all going through some sort of growing pain. And I remember thinking, wow, this growing pain is going to be inevitable. Something's going to break. We're going to lose our culture. But then I paired that thought with the feeling that Eventbrite to me was as important as my firstborn human baby. And at that time I had a baby too. So I could make an authentic assessment. And I thought, well, I might as well die trying to cultivate a great culture through this hypergrowth phase and beyond, because I think that's worth dying in the process of trying. And that unconditional love I felt really compelled me to dig into what I didn't know much about, which was building culture. Culture is actually, and very simply, the manifestation of the people at that place and time working together. And so therefore, it's not something that stays in one place. It's not a bug preserved in ember. It's actually an amoeba that constantly changes. But if you have the right core and the right elements, and you have that, whatever people call it, center of gravity, North Star, like you're always going to be building strength and attracting great people. And I just attended the 20th anniversary party of Eventbrite, where we brought together current and former, we call ourselves Brightlings. And I can definitively say we did the job. The bonds that people have, the stories they tell, the way they reference their time at Eventbrite, it really meant something.
We talk about culture as agreements. My assumption is you and the Brightlings had explicit or implicit agreements about how you work together. Can you share a couple of those?
Absolutely. The first one that is very clear now, and again, I have the benefit of hindsight, is that we care for one another. And that was this funny thing when we were growing in the beginning and we were hiring engineers. I remember an engineer would come through and would interview with Renault and pass the technical interview. Then they would interview with Kevin and they'd pass common sense and product sense. And then they'd come to me. And I remember when we were scaling from like 100 to 500 people, I was still meeting with every final candidate. And the recruiting team would say, watch out, this one's a little thorny, this one's a little cranky. And there's so much reverence for software engineers. And certainly back then when everyone was coding, it was like all hands on deck to recruit these engineers. And I would always walk out of the room practically arm in arm with this otherwise known as cranky engineer. And finally, one of the recruiters asked me, "What are you doing in there?" And I said, "I'm just asking them to tell me their story, and then I'm showing them empathy. And what I believe is there is not an engineer cranky enough who just doesn't want to be loved. Like everyone just wants to feel cared for." That was not me alone. That actually started to just reinforce how people treated each other. So care for one another above all else. That then translated very easily to care for customers. And so we had this almost like symbiotic relationship for if you care for one another, so you're never looking over your shoulder to ask, do I belong, or is this person doing something to undermine me? Then you have more energy to care for your customer. And that ended up being this virtuous cycle that just fed Eventbrite strength through every crisis and every hard time. And, we didn't always have the best culture, but we had a culture that cared for one another. Sub things around that were don't lie and do the right thing. And that's just how Kevin and I were raised. And so I think it was like reinforced into our culture from the beginning. And that really came in handy a lot.
Yeah, because it's easy to just not share something.
Yeah.
That's a mistake or embarrassing.
Yeah. And, we were always really honest with our customers, our team, when things weren't going well. And that was always the harder path. But I never wanted to go to bed thinking, I'm not telling the full truth.
We all say do the right thing, and it sounds easy on the surface, but we fail to consider how painful when stuff's on the line.
COVID hit Eventbrite in early March of 2020, and we were ready. Thankfully, we live in San Francisco. We have the crown jewel of UCSF and the research community, and we happen to be very close to the head of the infectious disease department. So that was like, wow, a great fortune, but also terrifying. So we knew that this was not going to be a passing 2-week thing. Mm-hmm. We also had the benefit of some incredibly smart people surrounding Eventbrite at the time. So people like Roelof Botha, our board of directors, Henry Ellen Bogan, incredible investors and long-term thinkers. And we went to them and said, what would you do if you were us? And they said, don't assume this is going to be fast. Take costs way down and raise money now and don't wait. That was, call it, maybe the first couple of weeks of March. By mid-March, we were processing more refunds than revenue. And actually, Bob Mylod, who had been the CFO of what became Booking during 9/11, had told me about that about a week before it happened. He said, kid, strap in, you're about to have negative revenue days. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I called him a week later and I said, all of our Tableau dashboards broke because our revenue line is below zero. Because what was happening was we were refunding more tickets for events that were getting canceled than we were selling tickets. Now, the bigger issue is that Eventbrite had grown to be this really efficient transactional platform. We were great at moving microtransactions of $50 or less in sum totals of billions of dollars a year for these events. We'd gotten so good at anti-fraud that we could actually front the ticket sales to our event creators for them to book the venue, book the act, pay the vendors with less than a 1% fraud loss.
Wow.
So you get to mid-March and we have hundreds of millions of dollars advanced out to event creators and producers and promoters and venue owners. We have more refunds than ticket sales, and all of those events are not going to happen. But nobody knows that. And when they don't happen, consumers get angry and they charge back, and it's a disaster. And so we were facing potential insolvency, which is why we needed to cut costs quickly and go raise money. But we also couldn't continue advancing that money. And so we had to decide to turn it off and turn off this advanced payouts program that many of our creators were counting on to stay afloat. And that was a really difficult decision. And I remember Kevin and I sitting in this office because we'd all gone home because we were now quarantining, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were calling our biggest customers and they were just furious with us. And we were trying to tell them, your event or your festival is not going to happen. We can't pay you money for an event that's not going to happen, but also you should not be paying your vendors and you're booking your venues because you're going to lose that money. And that was a really hard period of time that took a long time to recover from in terms of trust, but it also was the right thing to do. We protected their money. That was still their money. Their ticket sales were their money, but we needed to make sure that they could stay in business and that we could stay in business. And that was really hard. The second hard one was when we changed the pricing of our core product and we didn't land the execution. And then we reverted it a year later and we said we were sorry because that obviously did not land with our customers. There's so many ways you can kind of shimmy out of that. You can change it again. You can change it quietly. You can, not change it and figure out another way to make more money. But we went down the hard path of saying, you know what? We got this wrong. We didn't hit the mark on this, and here's why, and here's what we want to do about it. That was important for me as CEO to be able to look our customers in the eye and say, this was our mistake, nothing you did, and we'd like to regain your trust.
To me, this is all about how do I make sense of things? That seems like one of the biggest struggles for CEOs over time, and especially now when things are changing so quickly, the hype cycle is accelerated, and we're just trying to decipher the signals that are coming from so many different directions. How you made sense of what was happening with the pandemic is interesting. Tell us more about the process you went through of making sense of the mixed signals. Your customers are saying these things are going to happen. Your friends in the medical community are clear that it's not going to happen. You've got to make a decision with insufficient information.
The information was sufficient. It was the human emotion that was muddying the signal. It was so clear. Once you understood the history of this and the science of it and the rate at which it was spreading, there was absolutely no denying that it was going to be a pandemic. So I think the hardest part was having that knowledge. A lot of people had the knowledge. This isn't like we were in some secret bunker. It's just the human emotional system has a way of saying, but maybe not. And we just weren't willing to risk our customers' businesses and our business on what if we're wrong. I really, really admire and am grateful to the people who told us to act fast, as painful as it was. And I'll take you through kind of what that looked like, because what that actually looked like was gathering my team in mid-March. We had just filed out of our beautiful offices and had gone home, and it was chaos. You remember, like, everybody was trying to figure out Zoom. The Zoom team themselves, I spoke to Eric, the CEO, because people were starting to do online events, virtual events. So we built an integration really quickly. But I was talking to him and he said, well, we're such an in-office culture. It's just chaos right now because people are trying to figure out how to work from home. And I thought, like, that is so ironic. That's amazing. But, I gathered my executive team And there was a lot of fear, a lot of chaos, a lot of kids and dogs running around. And, I was like, how about we make a rule that you don't apologize for your kid or your animal? Because, if they hear that a lot, they're probably going to have some issues in the future. Like, they're going to have issues anyways. This is crazy. But like, maybe we just don't apologize for them and just like let them be in the picture, And then I said, given what you know about this business and all the choices we've made, good and bad and indifferent, what would you do if you could do it all over again? What could we do? And we just started riffing on that. We started like writing things down. And at the end of the meeting, we had a 1-pager on what we would do differently. And then I did not pre-plan this, but I have to say it was one of my finer leadership moments. I said, well, we're going to rebuild the company because there is no company right now. I mean, we're not making any money and we're facing this sort of imminent disaster if all of these events get canceled that we've already advanced all this money for. So let's go do this. Let's go make this company. The most brutal part of that was we had to almost halve the company in headcount. My rationale there was we needed a North Star and a strategic plan to make those cuts. Otherwise, you're just making your best guess and you're taking people's lives in your hand and without like a real purpose, right? So we needed that North Star to go build that company and then figure out who we needed for that company. The second thing was I had an instinct, given, again, our embracing of the fact that COVID was going to be enormous, that companies would take a while to do their layoffs. And I had this sense that if we laid off our team early, we kept on our entire recruiting team, which was like 25 people at the time because we were 1,200 people global. We could keep them on and actually make their full-time job, getting the people we were laying off, jobs. So that you could kind of invert the system and then rewire it. And our KPI was how many Brightlings are secure in a new job. Because my feeling was if we were the first ones to go out and like make a change, we could land those people before everything went to hell in a handbasket. And that worked. I mean, obviously not 100%, but it really did work. And it showed people that we were willing to walk the walk, even in the hard moments. And then we had to go raise expensive debt, to shore up our balance sheet, which I'm still a little sore about, but we had great partners and we ended up not needing the debt. Acting quickly and being decisive and paranoid, healthily paranoid that this was not going to be a small or short endurance sprint, that really paid off for us in terms of why Eventbrite even exists today. I mean, there's no reason why we should have made it through that. That was a disaster.
Back to your culture of caring about people, that you would pay recruiters to place your folks, makes such a strong statement about not just we say we care, we put money behind it. You had to pay those recruiters to place people.
I'm not trying to kind of get accolades for like doing a big layoff because I think obviously that's always should be the last case scenario. But I do think that in a moment when the company essentially didn't exist because, again, we weren't making revenue, I was sure that there was a way we could do it that would be aligned with our values and humane and thoughtful. That wasn't something that I wanted to be great at, but I knew that in any case, when you're facing that much uncertainty and you have to do something that hard, that there would be a way to show up for each other and care for one another. And I think that also helped a lot of people feel not alone, especially the people who stayed. And that was not an easy time to stay at the company. The years after that were not exactly, we weren't like whistling zippity-doo-dah. It was hard, and it was a really hard, long rebuild.
And my presumption is, as with many companies, you didn't know if you were going to have a business in a couple of years.
There was exactly one point when I thought it could be totally over. And I remember sitting, and a lot has happened in this blue office. And I remember sitting here and going, I think I might have been laying on the ground. And I was thinking like, how did I just spend the last 14 years building this company with Kevin and Renaud to lose it in 14 days? It had been exactly 14 days. And then I called one of my mentors, Rulof, and I said, I don't know if we're going to make it. And he said, no, you're going to make it. Like, you have the determination, you have the sheer will, and you have the right people around you, you're going to make it. And he made sure we made it. Again, it's like when the chips are that far down and you're in the middle of that much chaos, you really appreciate the people who pick up the phone and then the people who clear the way. And then after that conversation, I thought, oh my God, he's right. We're going to make it. Because I have this sort of fierce ownership and mentality and like mama bear quality around this company that like, of course we're going to make it. And that gave me the boost. And then I just assumed we were going to make it. So that helped.
So you went from fighting for this company that was akin to one of your children, and now you've exited. So what was that journey like, both for you personally and for the company to ensure you had successors and processes? When there's a charismatic founder or a charismatic senior executive who's been with an organization for years, often after they exit, the company doesn't thrive, and yet you're thriving.
It's very early days. I have a very large amount of optimism through knowledge of Bending Spoons, which is the company that acquired Eventbrite. I know that they will create a stronger product and build Eventbrite in a way that meets customers' needs faster than we were moving. And if I didn't know that definitively, this wouldn't have even been a concept. But also, Eventbrite needed to become a private company again. We needed to be able to invest in technical debt and take risks that weren't measured on a public quarterly cadence, as well as the public markets have changed and are really not hospitable to small cap companies. So you've got to decide, like, is it worth it to have all the things that I really valued in being a public company, the transparency, the rigor, the access to capital, those all worked in our favor and we embraced them wholeheartedly. I always said I would never take Eventbrite public and then complain about being a public company. But we were sure that this company needed to become a private company, and there's multiple pathways to do that, right? And we looked at all of them and we evaluated our options. And this option, I think, really does carry the most significant upside for our customers. And that was what was most important to me. And so I used that as the North Star to make the decision. And you're right, it is a big deal when a founder steps away. I've always marveled at a couple things. One is that just because you were there when the company was built and you were a founder doesn't mean that you should be the CEO of the company. I think that entitlement is bizarre because being a CEO is a totally different job than being a founder, and being a CEO is not for everyone. I think it's strange that people equate the two. In our case, Kevin was the CEO for the first 10 years, and then I was the CEO for the second 10 years. So we're sort of unique in that way that we have both played that role so we can support each other and understand. And there's like this sort of legacy that has both of our imprints as very different CEOs on it. But also, I think it's sort of bizarre how much weight the conviction of a founder holds. And I think that's very true. And I've experienced it many times. Part of what I had to do was find it in myself to authentically and genuinely have conviction that this is the right direction for the company and that this acquirer is the right acquirer. And so it took a while. I might have been like the last one to the party on this. But I can say that without a doubt, I think it will be great for our customers. And this era of Eventbrite, as it was, is over. And that's okay. It can be a new era starts. And that's what happens in life, right? So it took me a long time to get here and be able to like be pretty passionate about this and honest with you. I feel a huge degree of gratitude and optimism.
I hear you saying it was the right thing for our customers. And yet I also hear the same woman who was laying on the floor after 14 days saying, we're dead, and picking yourself up to move you forward. How did those around you help shape that choice to let your child graduate and go off to college?
There's so many parallels. I have a kid who is applying and hearing about college today. It's like there's so many weird parallels. I try to not make that comparison in my day-to-day at Eventbrite because I never wanted people to think that I was calling them children and or my family. Like we were a team. Well, I have to give so much credit to my team and the people that I worked closely with over the last couple of years because we were day in and day out really trying to change Eventbrite fast enough to meet the future of consumer expectations, the future of technology advancements, the future of the business model. And every day they would show up without ego, fully in it, and we would just keep going, keep going, keep going. When you involve your team so much in the day-to-day, and I really, as a leader, my system is a round table with 8 or 9 totally equal seats. When you involve everybody and expect them to know everything about the business and be an equal share owner truly in the decisions that we make, it's not hard for everybody to see the same picture. So while it was disappointing and people were on different timelines of acceptance, we all eventually got there. And by the time we announced that deal was going to happen, everybody either was explicitly there or implicitly there and understood why. And then as we've all turned the page on this next era for the company, the whole executive team has left. And I think that's actually a really good thing. It's very clean, it's very thoughtful, and it's part of Bending Spoon's playbook is that they're coming in to really run the company. And so, they're very hands-on. But the way that it's gone over the last few weeks has just been such a testament to the quality of the people that were attracted to work on the Eventbrite mission and with me in building the company. And I don't know what to say. I kind of feel like it's a mic drop because I did that. Like I found those people and they're incredible people. And now I spend my day connecting them to future opportunities and telling anyone who will listen how incredible they are. I was on stage at South by Southwest and my chief comms and brand officer and my chief legal officer were in the front row and we hadn't seen each other since the deal had closed days before. And I gave like their full resumes to the audience, as I had the mic because I'm like, I might as well. I think things like that where you really care for one another, you can have some fun, made the last few months between announcing the deal and closing really gratifying for me and fun. I did learn a very important leadership lesson, which is that when you release that white knuckle grip on something and you say, do what you know is right, do what you know is important, and go have some fun, better outcomes occur. So I went from like daily metrics readouts and like hounding people on Slack to being like, okay, once the deal was announced, I took a moment to be like, okay, everybody digest this. But also let's look out for one another, let's look out for our customers, and let's have some fun in this very awkward in-between period. And every other day, I'd get an update that was like, well, it's like you're going to the hairdresser and you're having a good hair day because all of a sudden things were moving and good things were happening and metrics were going up and to the right and product was shipping faster. And I thought like, oh, got it. I should have done that a couple of years ago. Darn it.
So on that note, in the spirit of innovating leadership and co-creating our future, what is one leadership choice you believe senior leaders or boards should make in the next 30 days?
Unequivocally, the most important system to pay attention to is common sense, human decency. Where is it alive and well in the organization? Where is it missing? We have gone through not only a global pandemic, recession, now fighting wars on multiple fronts, all the things. We also have gone through a huge period of reckoning as a country. I think it's time to wipe the slate clean and say, why don't we focus on common sense and human decency, basic human decency? And why don't we build cultures that can cultivate that in this virtuous cycle, just as we built Eventbrite? And I think that boards and founding team need to be really, really thoughtful about that. I spend my time now with entrepreneurs who are working on very early startups. Some of their earliest employees are these AI researchers who are being thrown lots of money, lots of opportunity, and They're very passionate about building foundational models and the future. What is not being talked about is what kind of a company, what kind of a culture do you want to build if you're successful? And you can't wait to be successful to do that. A little bit of my, not so much fear, but I think a huge opportunity is kind of going back to that. I never met an engineer who didn't just want a big old proverbial hug. Making sure that we're weaving in to the early company creation and early expectations of founders, this idea of, again, I would just call it like common sense, basic human decency. I'll probably think of a better term, but we're workshopping here. And making culture, giving it the proper place, the proper seat at the table once again. Not making it something that we're afraid of, not making it something that turns into unhealthy activism, like actually cultivating the thing that builds great teams and making sure that's a top priority early on.
Back all the way at the beginning of our conversation, like 40 minutes ago. But as you talked about how you started Eventbrite, it sounds like culture was the secret sauce and your foundation out of the gate.
It was. I would give Kevin 100% credit for seeding the culture. He doesn't even see that in himself, which is interesting. But he's a culture creator and a gatherer. And that was really what started it. And then I took that like seedling and I made it into something that became a forest. But it was really simple. It didn't overcomplicate it. And I was never shy about having bad reviews on Glassdoor. I don't go to Blind, but I am imagining there are terrible things there because we did go through hard times. I never thought that was a bad thing. I thought, yeah, like if we were all always the happiest place on earth, like that would be weird. You're not trying to be the happiest. You're trying to be the most sustainable, positive culture to drive innovation, to drive success, to drive a high-performing team. And that's going to take like anything, consistency. What's funny is that 2 members of my family need to be doing physical therapy to tend to injuries that they have, chronic injuries. And it's really difficult to do physical therapy because it's not as exciting as your sport. It's not as exciting as, getting fit. It's really boring, but it's the consistency that compounds over time that's going to solve the problem that's causing you so much pain. So it's a culture creation is a lot like that.
Excellence of any sort is practice. It's getting up early in the morning, getting to the gym. It's early mornings. It's doing things late at night. But that consistency builds the ability to perform. It's not sexy. Drawing that parallel to culture, that it is the choice when it's hard.
There were times when I had to reach in and not so much, take the driver's wheel. I'm sure the person on the other side felt like I did, but use some appreciative inquiry as to why we were making certain decisions around Brightlings. And it only took a few times for me having to do that. And certainly I would try to do it gracefully for the message to make its way into the organization that we were always going to treat Brightlings well, fair and well. And we were always going to do our best. We never, ever, ever proclaimed that we would get it always right. But that fairness was really important to us. And so, I think that too, as a leader, taking the energy and breaking the glass sometimes and going back and redoing it, and like, okay, wait, hold on, let's go slightly different route. That became second nature for me in a way that I very seldom would have to do it in the last few years, but to really make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable for that high bar.
Julia, thank you. I love the personal stories and hearing not just you put the right systems in place, but the complexities. It's hard to do this and takes every bit of stamina and commitment and heart.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. So how would our listeners learn more about you and what you're doing now? Are you writing? Are you blogging?
I have a presence on LinkedIn, so you can check me out there, and Instagram. It's just Julia Hartz.
Beautiful. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Please like us, and share this podcast with others you care about.